Oh, this is CHistrue, and I want to weigh in on a controversy that's been waging online between having women only or female exclusive viewings of Wonder Woman. I want to first of all say that I'm planning to view Wonder Woman tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to it. I think that there are some themes in that particular movie I've heard through the grapevine that it's sort of an anti-war movie, which I'm definitely looking forward to. So that's something that I think can bring a lot of diverse people together in a conversation. It could be a place of cultural conversation. And I would defend the movie theater like I would defend the museum, the library, and other intellectual social spaces as a place of communality, as a place of coming together, as a place of intersection, as a place of pluralism and inclusion. And it's on that basis that I would have to say that I do not support the idea of gender exclusive viewings. Now, I understand the reasons, and I understand why some people would. And no, it is not maybe that big of a deal, but I'm going to make a big deal out of it in order, not because I really think it's a big deal, but in order to express a point that I want to make, and that is these things do have an ominous history. No Irish need apply. There were signs up there. Obviously, issues around African Americans and exclusion, issues of the exclusion of women. Very clearly, they're very clear exclusions of women. This has an ominous history, and to say, well, it's a private business, or it's not a big deal, or you should get over it. These are exactly the things that the oppressors would say in those particular instances, often to the people being oppressed. No, I am not claiming that males are being oppressed in this particular instance. What I am saying is that the logic is very, very similar. It's a parallel logic. However, the purpose of this video is not to suggest that it's the same thing or that this is on the level of other forms of exclusion. It is one theater and it is a few hours. And I understand that we have men's clubs and we have women's clubs and we have that type of separation, although my understanding was that in the culture we were beginning to break it down. Even the very theme of Wonder Woman itself is about a woman taking a role that women traditionally were excluded from or did not have or did not seek out. And so the idea of the social progress represented by that would seem to negate the idea of separate spheres or separate spaces or zones of exclusion or lack of cultural conversation or cultural meeting place, the lack of a cultural meeting place. However, I think that there's more that needs to be said because it's easy to attack something at its weakest point. But I want to address the strongest point that the proponents of having an exclusive women's only viewing have made. And this is a valid point, and that is, yes, women have been excluded from films of this nature that has been defined as a rigidly male space. And they would say that because of this, there should be some parity or there should be a sense in which there's a space that makes it okay for women to have this experience of rooting for the hero. I would argue you could also have male-only events that would make it okay to explore certain emotions too that men might not want to explore with wives or girlfriends. So I think if you're going to make a case for this, you can also make a case for a male-only view of Gandhi because he represents a kind of masculinity that is not represented in our hyper macho, hyper masculine, hyper warrior culture. So I'm thinking that I'm possibly willing to fold on this issue if and only if we, meaning I'm defined as a male, the culture defines me as such, therefore that is what I am. There's no real way of getting out of it. I mean, it's what I am. If as someone defined as a male, I choose to explore areas of myself that have traditionally been closed off to me, I might also want to have an audience of men as a social support. If you're willing to allow for that and not protest it and not define that as exclusion, then I might be willing to fold on this. It isn't necessarily that big of a deal. So it's easy to attack something at its weakest point, but I want to attack lovingly, and through dialogue. This at its strongest point. And that is, I want to challenge the claim that male superhero films are about male privilege. I do not deny that when the hunter-gatherer period ended up until maybe a few decades ago, there was male privilege. That there were privileges that men had that women did not have. By the way, there were privileges, not equal privileges, but there were privileges that women have had too, that might need to be explored in this debate and in this discourse. But I'm not going to deny that there have been privileges, but I don't think that those were the purposes of war films, and I don't think that those were the purposes of superhero films. The purposes of those films were the indoctrination of men into, quote, responsibility. Male responsibility, including, by the way, male disposability, including, by the way, the male role as the worker for the system, the male role as the father and the transmitter of the values of civilization, which, unlike the hunter-gatherer period, tended to have a strong dose of authoritarianism in them. So from father to son would be an habituation to subordination. This is not to say that this was not the case for women, and that women have not suffered extraordinary brutality, but the claim that men have had this privilege where we have not been subject to extraordinary brutality, where we all came together and created this privilege system, and we all shared in it equally, that is contrary to the history of class domination, it's contrary to the history of racial domination, and it's contrary to the history of the narrative around the superhero films and the war films. These are about males subordinating themselves to what is considered to be the higher purpose. That higher purpose has more often than not been defined by the military, by the state, by the very rigid concepts of masculinity that have been formed in societies. Men have been expected to kill other men. And unlike with men killing women, which is frowned upon, thankfully, and unlike men killing children, which is, as with women, considered horrific, thankfully, but men killing men is a different thing, because as with the violence of police abuse against African Americans or strikers, as with the pitting of various poor and disadvantaged groups against one another, these things are considered statistics. They're not reacted to emotionally. And when you see the violence in these war films, and most of them have been male, of men dying, they're, even in the film, it's not reacted to emotionally. That to me is not male privilege. It may be the privilege of male ruling classes and male social elites, but it is not, quote, male privilege in the way that a lot of my good friends, and I know that on my channel I have a number of feminists, and I have a number of, it tends to be a more liberal channel, given a lot of the things that I've talked about. And I welcome an honest debate with you. I don't want, a lot of these debates get very polarized, and I want comments below. I will ban for bad language, though. I will control for bad language and for threats from all sides. I'm challenging the central narrative that Superman and Batman are about male privilege. They are about the indoctrination into, quote, being a real man, which oftentimes involves a lot of violence, but it's a rigid kind of violence. It's not that we're these violent people by nature and we're just running around and we need all this control over us from the patriarchy and from the state. Otherwise, no. Actually, human societies in the hunter-gatherer period were not as violent as this. They were also not as hierarchical and rigid. And so I'm questioning a standpoint of male privilege from, I guess you could say, the left. I know it's a controversial one. I don't claim that this is the final truth, but I think it needs to be part of the debate. Please comment below, and please comment respectfully.